I think there are
Uh,
a couple where she's like a child, but
yeah,
that's the one that says
yeah,
my fifth autumn specifically,
yeah.
sucking her thumb. Yeah.
So I think she sets herself problems. I think that she doesn't necessarily need to set Glick, and I think this is falls into that category right fair and square. So she's saying, why is it that children aren't oppressed by the things that their fathers and mothers know? Why is that?
Right.
So she torments herself with these kind of questions. You
Or
can't really answer that question.
the
Um,
great, the
we
great
just
tragedy. No, please go on.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know the answer, do we? And yet she tortures herself on and on and on, torture, trying to figure all
I've
that out.
I've been thinking about this. Speaking of synchronicities here, Damon, just yeah, reading this book to talk with you and then having our hours long conversations, reading this other book, reading, normal stuff that I read in my life and this is my everyday interests and stuff, synchronicities. I've been thinking more about that Yeats poem, Sailing to Byzantium, right? That
Yeah,
kind of
beautiful poem.
that is no country for old men.
Yeah,
And the great tragedy I think that's referring to is that obviously the tragedy of aging, but the tragedy of maturing, I think, is what Glick might be getting at. In that same vein, is when you're a child, where does nostalgia come from? Where does our longing to relive our childhood or give our children the childhood that we have, the memories, the nostalgia things, show them these things? Does it come from this sense of, I don't know, getting back to where you lost hope? Or I don't know, something about that where I do get that sense of it, the fact that it's a children's story, right? The title of that poem.
yeah,
Um, so like
yeah.
children's stories have these neat little endings where the princess, if you do the right thing or you're a good person, you get the ideal outcome or you get what you were after in some way. But then when you grow up, you realize that's not the case, right? That it isn't, of course, you always want to strive to do that, but that isn't necessarily the case, right? Sometimes, yeah, nice guys finish last. Sometimes, evil wins. Sometimes the person that's more willing to be more sinister and screw you over wins in the long run, kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe there's some aspect of that too, in terms of calling the children princesses too, at this fantasy that they're living out. And I think that's something that my generation, maybe more so, where there is this, if you were a woman growing up in the millennial generation, at least in America here, like there was this constant kind of daddy's little princess type thing that you were constantly living out. Uh, I don't know.
So do
I
you
mean, men
think?
can do this too. Boys can have this happen to them too. But I'm just saying, it's maybe more prevalent in the female side of growing up. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying because the word
So do you
princess
think?
and blah blah blah, playing fantasy princess games, kind of as a
So do you
child, and
think that
then
that's a? You think that's something that we've? The sense of that is something that we don't have anymore. Is that what you think?
I mean,
The
maybe as
sense
as
of you
we
don't
grow
mind.
up, we
Yeah,
tend to lose it. And maybe
yeah.
that's why we think of certain stories as children's stories and then certain stories as adult stories. What's the difference? Well, the adult stories usually don't have that many happy endings, right? It usually tends to be more cynical. Maybe it's time period too, right? If you go, we talked a lot about Victorian period. The endings tend to be, although they're not that happy. But I mean, they tend to be happier maybe than some of the modernist text endings where you read those novels and they always end with some tragedy or, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I was just thinking about it with this kind of, it's something that's constantly plaguing me. And I think it's plaguing the culture at large as well when it comes to literature and art specifically this longing for something that was lost. It's a very romantic thing, which I enjoy, I think is important, especially when it comes to art. But I think there is this, maybe because the population's median age is getting older, maybe, I don't know. But like there is this sense of the world that you grow up in no longer exists, right? That's why I kept thinking of that Yeats line, that is no
Mm.
country for old men. And actually, the world that you grew up in no longer exists. And actually, the current one is actively hostile to you and your nostalgia and your memories and kind of, wanting to relive that or recreate that or find where hope was lost again.
Well, I
I
mean,
don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I
I
don't know.
guess we're, in the social media age, in 24-hour news,
Yeah.
it just looks bleak, doesn't it? I mean, we
Yeah.
were talking
Oh,
about, I mean, you were saying earlier, the politicians will only do something about the water shortages in
right.
Southern California, 2 years before, there's a total complete collapse, and that'll be too late to do anything about it. I mean, that story is replicated over and over and over. And I mean,
Right. Yeah.
young people are reading that, people of all ages are reading that, and they're thinking, well, was it that bad when I was, when I was young? Did the whole weight of the world and the direction of our prospects of humanity of surviving another couple of years. When, you know, was it that was it that bad? And of course, that's what a lot of parents ask themselves before they have children. Should we, should we bring children into this world? But I think Glick has got a she has a very ambitious mind, and
Yes.
she is trying to will herself into the mind of herself at the age of 5, as a less oppressed person. And whereas Yeats, he just accepts what it is. He says, I've just been looking at the poem, and he says, I'm I'm going to go. There's that lovely sort of line, isn't it? And so, where is it? And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. So he's going to leave the young in each other's arms. He's going to leave the salmon, leaping, spawning on the rivers, and accept that therefore I've sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium, where, you know, sort of interesting things are happening. Not like not like Glick's grey marshland, they're Osages standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall. And and the people are there, um having fun with sort of poetry and culture. And once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing. So once he's gone through that transformation, um, all good, as the Americans say. So I will take a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enameling to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough, famous phrase that, to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past or passing or to come. So it's not, he sort of overcomes the nostalgia in a way in the poem, and he says he projects himself into that future. He's a perfect poet to sort of actually to pair with Blake and to sort of talk about these themes in many, in many ways, because he
Yates
has
is he's one of
yeah,
those ones. I mean, and we talk. I mean, Helen Vendler comes up on the podcast from time to time throughout the entire
yeah.
existence here. And for listeners that don't know, she's very old now. So she's in her 90s, I believe, or I think she just died recently, actually. So I
I've
think she's
I've read
dead
her
now.
I've read a book on Emily Dickinson. It's terrific.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Her Dickinson, Yates, Wallace Stevens, those were kind of her like big figures that she was obsessed with. But anyway, she basically was one of the premier American poetry critics in the world. She taught at
Mm.
Harvard for many years, and again, as I said, recently passed in her 90s there. But there was this interview I remember very distinctly where she wrote her PhD dissertation way back when on Yeats. And she said she remembers being 28, getting her PhD, finishing it up, and starting to read some of Yeats' later stuff, his stuff that he wrote in his 60s and 50s, like Sailing to Byzantium and some of these other, like his later works. And she said she reached this point where she was 28 and reading this poetry of a 65-year-old man from, 50 years ago at that time. And she just said, like, wow, I don't even know what he's talking about because like I couldn't even begin to understand like what he's trying to work through in these. I have an
Yeah.
idea, I can imagine, I can, use my logic and reason to imagine something that's similar, that's maybe close, but you're not quite getting where that like 65-year-old man who has had this great illustrious career is coming from. Watch the trends change, not just once, but several times over the course of his life, in the course of his writing. I don't know, something like that. That's why I get so kind of, man, how old was the poet when they wrote this? Because at that certain seasons in your life, as some people would say, there are these different points of reflection. When you're younger, maybe you're looking back at your childhood more, but then when you reach a certain point, you're kind of stopped looking back. Maybe the parents in that poem for the child's tale, right? The parents know that like hope is lost in terms of
Yeah.
getting back to that school age children, the children's stories, the children's games, dressing up like princesses, being treated and living like a princess. All of a sudden, then you reach this level of, I don't know. I'm just thinking of that too. And that's why I kind of am like, man, how old was the poet? All of this. Because I think that's something that Wendler would emphasize in a lot of her work, or at least a lot of her criticism for poetry and stuff. And you can see it play out when you start reading a book with that kind of framework in mind. You can start to pick up on these things. Like you said, even some of the themes that are blossoming in her first two books that become much more prominent in later books. It's just so fascinating to see where somebody is in their life. And then you said that poem that we just read, a children's story where she's writing this towards the end of her life here, like looking back, and Glick lived to a nice, ripe old age. Like wasn't she like 90 or something when she died or something like 80 something when she passed away, Glick, a few years
Who,
ago?
Glück? Yeah, I
Yeah.
think yeah, she's sort of 82, something like that, I think.
Yeah, so ripe,
Yeah.
ripe, ripe, great life. Yeah. And then, I don't know. So you start writing about these different things. You start thinking bigger. You start being maybe more cynical or maybe even less cynical. I don't know. I mean,
That's
it's
that
just
lovely.
interesting.
Do you remember There's a Stolen Child by Yeats? Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Sort of lots of yeah, might sort of there are comparisons there, aren't there? This
That
sort of
and I think about literature in general too. Maybe poetry is the more obvious one where there maybe it's an exaggeration to say death knell or something where you're like I don't know, seeing these figures die, seeing Glick die, seeing Helen Vendler die, Harold Bloom a few years before that, these giants, towering intellectual giants of poetry and writing and literature. And there's nobody replacing them, and it feels like it's the end of something. And maybe it is, maybe it's the end of a certain era and we're going to a different era now. We don't know yet where that's going. I don't know. There's just something that I get this very, maybe it's just cultural, this kind of sense of dread or this sense of ending, this sense of the world changing more than it
I
ever
think you do.
has.
I
I
think you
don't
do
know.
have that. I mean, if you go to to reference Tennyson again,
Yeah,
he he went to live on the Isle of Wight, and he was a great friend of Queen Victoria, and they were great mates because they had a lot of this sort of thing in common. Because Tennyson lost his great friend Arthur Hallam, and uh, and the early death of Albert, of course, with Queen Victoria, and they've got this. I was so you know one of the least traveled people you ever meet. I actually have been to the Isle of Wight, and we walked up onto the down over the sort of white chalk cliffs, and suddenly this enormous sort of cross appeared, and I thought, "What on earth is that?" And I walked up to it, and it's the Tennyson Monument, and
wow,
I think that we've been through these things before, of sort of where it feels like the end of the poetry.
right.
Alfred Lord Tennyson dies, and well, who's going to write anything like that anymore? And
And arguably no one has. Yeah, yeah, with Tennyson. Yeah,
I know I do love him. I do love him.
yeah,
Um, but poetry goes on. I mean, poetry is inside of us.
right,
We use it all the time. I mean, my
right,
personal definition of poetry is um, it's the ability to contrive an exotic thought and the means of its enablement. So without poetry, we can't go into these more exotic ideas about the world and about ourselves, and we use it all the time. And it's like sort of people don't. I would love just to explain that to people. You don't have to read a poem to um to use for poetry to be working in your life, because it's working all the time. Every
right.
time you have an imaginative thought, every time you have an exotic thought and you don't know what to do with it, and you're trying to figure out how to put it into a useful place, or to make it mean something or something more than it first means, you're using poetry. And I just wish I could understand that. So I mean, poetry, I just wish other people could understand that a little bit more. It's Poetry is
What
not something that's in a book, you know.
I know Harold Bloom would say poetry is figurative language.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a very simplistic, and his definition is much more complicated than just that, but I think that's a good place for people to start. It is
Mm,
figurative language.
mm.
So you could see that in fiction. You could see that in advertising copy. You can see this figurative language. You can see it in
Yeah,
music, in
yeah.
songs, in all of, pop cultural stuff.
And
movie
wherever we're going,
taglines.
yeah,
Yeah,
wherever we're going, poetry is going to be with it, be
right.
coming with us. You know,
And that's
sad.
why I stress
A lot of people
poetry.
might be a bit depressed about that, but I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. It's just that is what's going to happen. We'll
And that's why I
always
always
have
stress
poetry.
it with young writers too, where I was like, if you're struggling to write fiction, maybe try studying some poetry here
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's obviously there's different forms, but if you understand even just the basic concepts of figurative language, pacing, melody, even if not, we can go really strict with metric, but most people are just doing melodic kind of not quite metric, but a little established rhythm in your work or something.
Mm,
When you're familiar with all that, it makes prose writing a little bit easier. Not that it's easy, but it makes it a little bit easier. I notice when I'm reading a fiction versus poetry, even like I'll start underlining just a beautiful little phrase or a beautiful little description that I'm like, that's poetic. Like that is a poetic description here. Underline it. And I notice this is the reason I even bring up things like I know people listeners are probably tired of hearing about it, but something like Stephen King, like when you're reading something like that, that's clearly not even trying to be a literary masterpiece. But every once in a while, you'll come across the sentence where you're just like, man, that's a beautiful little phrase, like from this guy that doesn't really concern himself with that so much. But he does in a way. Like
mm.
it's very, that's what connects that kind of poppy Stephen King novel to something like Tennyson, to something like Glick, to Hemingway, to these other things. It's these little phrases, these little bits of poetry, as you framed it. I think that's a good way to
Yeah,
think about it.
and I mean
That
the
follow us around,
yeah,
follow all the genres in literature, follow a lot of art forms, songwriting. Yeah.
yeah, and to be able to contrast a children's story, this poem, with a poem like Sailing to Byzantium, it's just a lovely contrast.
Yeah.
It's not, that's the answer. That could be an answer to this poem. We must return. So
A
anyway,
constant living conversation. Yeah.
yeah, just to go back to that. So Hunter's view, this chair of English at Case Western Reserve University, Walt Hunter, he says, the children are frightened by that great unknown, the future, which the children, not the parents, will have to inhabit. The thought leaves them all sad and shaken, but also determined. Now, this, I think, is something that critics do with Blick over and over again. They look for a bright point, and I don't think there is one. She ends this poem, all hope is lost. We must return to where it was lost if we want to find it again. So Blick's kind of saying we want to pick up that thought. If the future is lost and hope is lost, we need to go back to where it was lost. So by your definition, that would be when the great poets and the critics have passed, have died, and everybody's thinking, well, what do we do now? There's these great poets, we've lost them. How are we going
Right.
to go back? And Glick is saying in this poem, well, we just have to go back to where it was lost
Do you ever
if
do
we
that? I
want
mean,
if
I
we
know
want to
you do
find it again.
this. Yeah, where like when I'm feeling stuck sometimes, or even if I'm feeling like falling out of love with poetry or something, a lot of times I find it helps if I go back to where it started. So for me, it's things like Bukowski, blah blah blah. If I go back and just start reading, flipping through, reading a little bit, I start to remember why I even got into this in the first place, or why I was attracted to poetry and poetic
Yeah,
lines and figurative language. And maybe there is something to that, even at a small scale like that, or we could do large scale, which is the
possibly.
genius of Glick's work.
Mm.
You could do both interpretations, but I don't know. I think there might be something to kind of returning, or maybe that's why she was always longing for marshes and water and this kind of coastal
I don't know.
nature
I tend
scene.
to think when I'm reading Glick, I tend to think Glick. I don't tend to think about other poets, but maybe that's a fault on my part. Maybe maybe if I wasn't so like, I've got quite a good visual imagination, so I can see this sort of assembling of the landscape and everything, all these little figures. You know, maybe, maybe at an intellectual level, um, you could you could find something positive in the ending of that. We must return to where it was lost if we want to find it again. I mean, it's a rather sort of gnomic line, isn't it? I mean, we must return to where it was lost if we want to find it again. I mean, it's like no guarantees, I suppose, isn't it? You can do that, but I'm not guaranteeing that you're going to find anything when you do, but you might. The little
Yeah.
princesses in the back of the car, they don't know what's coming down the road, do they?
It's an interesting, I mean, obviously we can
Anyway,
go super deep on some of those, like, yeah, if oh, what does it mean to go back and find what was lost? But of course, it's a poem, so it's not giving us a specific thing, or maybe we could say childhood, or that innocence of childhood that everybody is, most adults are more obsessed with than any child, right? Like, where you're like, oh no, they're innocents, but then like, are they? Is it just ignorance that we view as innocence in some way? Which may be,
mm,
that's kind of a moral thing in most of Western societies. We do set that up with, were you ignorant of this or were you intending to break the law? Or yeah, like that is a consideration, especially if you're a younger person getting in trouble. I don't know. Something, I don't know. I'm just thinking how we think of it as a humanity and stuff like that. Maybe we're getting too bogged down with this one,
this
David.
is
We should move on.
this is turning into part one of the house on Marshland.
Yes, yes. Yes, yeah, we should move on. Yeah. What you said you wanted to hit Gemini. Let's hit Gemini and then get into the
Well, I'd rather
second
not
part.
hit. I'd rather not hit Gemini because really like to get on to the upper trees. But it's such an important poem. I think that I haven't got it written down as a very important poem, but the reason it's important is that it pairs with All Hallows, which starts the first section, which is called All Hallows, and Gemini comes in at the end. Um, I think probably got to read it. Do you want
Sure.
to read that? I mean, the
Sure. Yeah.
openings, the openings, the openings very very striking.
Yeah. Gemini. There is a soul in me. It is asking to be given its body. It is asking to be given blue eyes, a skull matted with black hair, that shape already formed detaching. So the past put forth, a house filled with asters and white lilac, a child in her cotton dress, the lawn, the copper beech, such of my own lives I have cast off. The sun, the sunlight chipping at the curtains, and the wicker chairs, uncovered winter after winter, as the stars finally thicken and descend as snow.
Yeah, snow again. I don't like that icy snow. It's always a bad sign. The world of the soul. Anyway, I think we can discard those last, the stars turning into snow. We don't want to think about that. But
Well, Gemini, right? We talk about Gemini season, obviously, with this kind of. Was she a Gemini?
golly,
Or when was she
uh,
born? What month?
I don't know. I have to go back to look up that.
Well, it's not
Um,
super important, but yeah,
yeah,
the
yeah.
astrology.
Maybe she is. Yeah, it's probably a good guess. Yeah, she probably is.
Or you could even just think the summertime, right? The
20,
spring, the
22nd,
thaw.
22nd of April. She was born
Oh,
1943.
so
That
she's not.
Gemini?
Maybe, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't. Some woman will comment in the thing and let us know if we're right or not.
Yeah, I could look it up.
But
Dates, Gemini star sign. Star. Maybe that's why there's a reference to the to the stars at the end. I bet you're right.
thicken and descend as snow.
Yeah. Gemini. What are the 12 zodiac dates? Um, Gemini, May the 21st to June the 20th.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so she was born in April. So she's an Aries.
So this is referring more towards the season, the thawing, the spring, birthing into summer here.
No, why do they call in the Apollo program? Why do they call Gemini Gemini? Why was that?
No idea.
No idea. I thought you might know that.
No, yeah, no idea. With but
22nd
I
of
know
April.
they're all
She's
named for Greek. Usually they're named for some type of the Greek mythology. A lot
oh,
of
okay.
those, Apollo, Gemini.
Okay.
We stopped doing that more recently. We named them just Discovery or something. But usually we would, back in the day, it was always Greek names. So when this came out, it was probably still kind of Greek mythology names. We were naming the spacecrafts and the missions and the.
Okay. So Gemini is represented by the twins Castor and Pollux, known as the Dioscuri in Greek mythology. It is known as a positive mutable sign, if that helps.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the past put forth a house filled with
Oh,
asters
I
and
know.
white
I know.
lilac.
No, I know. It's because of the great twins. It's the great twins. So she's twinning the soul in me, asking to be given a body, with her own self as a child. So the past put forth a house filled with asters and white lilac, a child in her cotton dress, the lawn, the copper beech. That's her. Such of my own lives I have cast off. So that's why she's twinning. She's twinning the soul in her. So this is a pregnancy poem, I suppose. The soul in
Yes, yeah.
her with her own young self. So that's why she's called Gemini, because and the twin because it's mother and child, obviously. So yeah, so right. Anyway, let's move on to the apple trees.
Let's go.
Um, anything? I mean, so I it's got a different feel to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I did notice that there's a, you know how I was dividing uh when I started this, I thought I'd just gather all of Glick's poems into sort of sets and give them names. And I noticed actually that one of the sets I hadn't got together, but which starts off in this section, is the end of a relationship poem. So
Yeah.
so we've got the end of the relationship, and that is um here are my black clothes is one of them, and the letters, which is really a lovely poem, and it's about. Shall I just read that actually? Because it's such a lovely poem. It's about the end of a relationship, but it's also got a little bit of her water phobia sort of creeping in. Um, and it's also just very what's the word begins with R? It's very it's sort of quite, I don't know, it's sort of like regretful, but sort of in a way happy at what you've been through. It wasn't all, I'm sure there's word beginning with R, but
The
anyway.
bitter sweetness of a breakup,
Yeah,
kind of.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
What's another word for bittersweet? It's a bit like that. Anyway,
yeah.
so this poem is called The Letters. It is night for the last time your hands gather on my body. So it's almost like she's writing this, knowing that they're going to sort of separate, this couple's going to separate the next day almost. Tomorrow it will be autumn. We will sit together on the balcony, watching the dry leaves drift off over the village. Like the letters, we will burn one by one in our separate houses. Such a quiet night. Only your voice murmuring, "You're wet, you want to," and the child sleeps as though he were not born. In the morning it will be autumn. We will walk together in the small garden, among stone benches and the shrubs still sheeted in mist like furniture left for a long time. Look how the leaves drift in the darkness. We have burned away all that was written on them. No, it's really, yeah, I think it's very sweet, sweet, sweet poem that actually. Yeah. Do you want to read the companion poem here on my black clothes?
Sure. Um, Let me get here are my black clothes. I also want to talk about the fortress as well next to that
Yeah,
one.
okay, well, let's look at that one as well.
Yeah, here are my black clothes. I think now it is better to love no one than to love you. Here are my black clothes. In tired nightgowns and robes fraying in many places. Why should they hang useless, as though I were going naked? You liked me well enough, in black. I make you a gift of these objects. You will want to touch them with your mouth. Run your fingers through the thin, tender under things, and I will not need them in my new life.
Yeah, yeah.
My black clothes.
So I think that's pretty. That kind of explains itself. Do you want to? So you want to look at the fortress? There's nothing now to learn. The lesson past disease was easy. Okay, okay. Well, do you want to read that one as well?
Sure, yeah, the fortress. There is nothing now to learn. The lesson past disease was easier. In God's hotel, I saw my name and number stapled to a vein as Marcy funneled its corrective air toward Placid. I can breathe again. I watch the mountain under ice give way to blocks of dungeons, ovens manned by wives. I understand. They coil their hair. They turn their music on as, humming to herself, the night nurse smooths her uniform. This is the proper pain. The lights are out. Love forms in the human body. Which is interesting that this is, again, it's a love poem that can only kind of be done by Glick here, where it's this very reluctant love poem. It's this,
Yeah,
there's a little
yeah,
reluctance, but it's kind of sweet in a way, but there's this kind of bitterness underneath too. There is
yeah.
nothing now to
Mm.
learn.
Yeah, so this is going back actually to this is going back to to firstborn actually. Um where yeah, like so on the seventh, eighth line in firstborn it says,
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.